As someone who travels all the time, there are numerous different ways to travel, and hostels, in my opinion, is one of the best ways to do it. However, like anything in life, there's a right way to do hostels and a wrong way to do hostels.
Oh, hi, Mark.
What's up, Freccero fam? Welcome back to my channel, where I like to experience everything that life has to offer. As most of you know, I'm constantly traveling and bouncing around doing tons of vlogs, regardless of where I am. And like I said in the intro, hostels are one of the best ways to travel. However, there's a lot of things I really wish I knew before staying in hostels, given the experience, the logistics, and a lot more. So in this video, I'm going to talk about the 10 things I wish I knew before staying in hostels. Number 1, do research. Now I know this is a weird place to start because technically watching this video is research in of itself. But this is a big thing, probably one of the biggest ones that I did not expect when staying at hostels. And that is this. When you're staying at hotels, yes, there's good hotels and bad hotels, of course. And there is a spectrum. But I feel like when it comes to hotels, you kind of know what to expect. Like the biggest differences are, is there a pool or not? Is there a complimentary breakfast or not? Things like that. When it comes to hostels, however, there is a massive spectrum of amenities, what they offer, the culture, and so much more. For example, there are hostels that are just known as being party hostels. It is typically a younger crowd, and they're more party-like hostels. There are other hostels, however, that are a lot more low-key. There are some hostels that have private rooms in them, which allow you to kind of get the best of both worlds, and I'll talk about that a bit later in this video. There are other ones that, like, say, have complimentary breakfast, similar to a hotel, or they only provide coffee, etc., etc. I highly suggest when traveling, maybe even just call the hostel and say, hey, I'm just curious, what's the culture like? What's the environment like? Maybe go on their website and read information about the hostel. This is vital. Again, this is something I really wish I knew because when it comes to hotels, you kind of know what to expect, right? I mean, yeah, there's good and bad hotels, like I said, but it's usually kind of the same thing, right? You go to your room, you have a private room. Yeah, maybe there's a pool or not. Maybe the hotel has a gym or not. When it comes to hostels, however, there are so many different types of hostels and setups and logistics and so much more. Some hostels don't have AC, and if you're staying in a hot area, that is something to consider. When it comes to picking a hostel for you, it's not about picking the best hostel. It's always about picking the right hostel. Number 2, sleeping logistics. Now, I'm gonna say this right away. When it comes to the pros and the cons of a hostel, at least in my opinion, the biggest pro, starting there, is you're around a lot of people traveling. It's a very, very social environment, and I might as well say it's typically cheaper than a hotel, of course. But I think the biggest pro for most people, even if you do have the money, is to be around that social environment. The biggest con, however, I find by far is the sleeping logistics, because typically you're gonna be in a room with minimum, and I stress minimum, 4 people. You typically might have 8. I've been in some hostels where I'm in a room with 16 other people. And there's a lot that you have to know. I will say this as a side note. Typically, when you do book a hostel and you go on their site or however you do it, like so you call them, whatever, typically the less amount of people in a room, the more expensive it's gonna be. The more people in a room, the cheaper it's gonna be. So let's say you're like, hey, Mark, I'm not gonna lie, 16 people, too much. 4 people, technically 3 plus me, not too bad. Keep in mind, you might have spent a little more money, but for a lot of hostels, that is an option. In addition, some hostels have mixed gender rooms, so guys and girls in the same room. Other hostels have, like, say, guys only rooms and girls only rooms. When it comes to these sleeping logistics, however, I'm gonna kind of go through this very fast, like bullet point style, just in terms of things you need to keep in mind. 1, the temperature. Some hostels have AC, some don't. In addition, I've known people who've gotten to almost temperature wars, if I'd call it that, where for some people, their body runs too cold, so when the AC's on, they, like say at 3 a.m., go and turn it off. I know other people who run too hot, where they run the AC super, super cold, and then people get mad at them. Of course, everybody's body temperature is a little bit different. This is something to keep in mind. Like say if your body runs naturally a bit colder, maybe you have to bring more clothes and just be prepared for that. Because keep in mind, when you're in a hostel, you do have to kind of have this, I hate to say it, social awareness that, hey, I'm not the only person in this room. And anyone who stayed at hostels know, most of the people understand that. They know, hey, I'm only one person in this room. The world does not revolve around me. However, that being said, there's been some times, and everybody knows this who travels, where I'm in a hostel and I'm like, has this person ever been around other people before? Because they try to make it all about them. Keep in mind, there is a balance where, of course, you want to make sure you're comfortable, but you're also in a room with other people, and there has to be some type of compromise. In addition to this, I highly suggest bringing an eye mask and also earplugs. These are vital. Now, some hostels have a privacy curtain when it comes to your bed. However, some don't. And an eye mask can really help out with this, especially if, let's say, it's, 10 a.m., let's say you've had a long night and you want to sleep in a bit later, but people turn on the lights around, let's say, 9 or 10 a.m., the eye mask can help with that. On this note as well, when it comes to talking about light, it is kind of an unspoken rule that, let's say it's 4 a.m. or 5 a.m., you get back, whether you just went to the club, or let's say you're waking up to go catch your flight, to use your phone flashlight. You do not want to turn on the main light in the room, maybe before, I'd say 9, maybe 8 or 9. It does depend, but I'd say usually 9 just to be safe, because remember, yes, you want the lights on, but maybe not everyone else does. In addition, the earplugs. This is a big one for two different reasons. One, again, this is one of the unfortunate things about staying in a hostel. People have different flights. So there's been some hostels I've stayed at where someone's alarm goes off at 6 a.m. Then another person's alarm goes off at 7 a.m. Then another person's alarm goes off at 7:30. Then another person's alarm goes off at 8. And I'm like, okay, I just got woken up 4 times in a row. Earplugs can really help out with this. And on that note, when it comes to talking about alarms, if you are a snoozer, someone who has 4 alarms in a row, separated by 5 or 10 minutes, you have to be considerate, right? I do want to stress that maybe stay in a private room, or maybe be like, hey, you know what? I just got to set one. This is my time to kind of bite the bullet, because you don't want to be waking everybody up. Lastly, one big thing I have to talk about when it comes to hostels, and this is a big no-no, is snoring. I've even seen a lot of posts online on Reddit and other forums saying, look, if you're a snorer, if you know you snore loud, you should not stay at hostels whatsoever. It is tough to say exactly, but one thing I will say is having self-awareness is very important. And if you're somebody who snores very loud and you know it, and you've tried the strips, you've tried other means to kind of mitigate the noise, but you just know you're a loud snorer, I would maybe consider staying at a private room or some kind of other means. If you're in a room with 16 people, and I've been there when I'm in a room with 16 other people, and there's one guy or girl snoring like a dubstep concert, that's the worst thing, because you're disturbing everybody else's sleep. Granted though, sometimes people are very light snorers. Either way, this is why I do suggest having earplugs, but nonetheless, I do have to mention this because I feel like this is a bit of a taboo thing, that if you are a big snorer, maybe hostels are just not for you. Number 3, solo rooms. I want to make this its own point because I feel like I'm not going to lie. Solo rooms are the best of both worlds. You get your own private room. Sometimes you get a private bathroom or not. Sometimes you get a private shower or not. These are things to look into. That's why I suggested doing research. But when it comes to solo rooms, as it sounds, you have your own private room, kind of similar to a hotel, but usually, being honest, it's usually like a private bed, maybe a private bunk bed, which I've stayed in before, and that's about it. Typically, you don't really have your own private bathroom or shower, although some hostels do, but typically when it comes to solo rooms in hostels, it's just a bed, that's it. But I gotta say, I think they are the best of both worlds. You get your own private room to have privacy. You don't have to worry about all the sleeping logistics I've talked about earlier, right? Like say if you snore, like say if you don't want to get woken up early by alarms, like say if you don't want to have to worry about earplugs, eye masks, all these different things, you have your own private room. And in addition, you still get all the benefits of the hostel, being around tons of other travelers, being able to socialize and go out, being able to meet new people, and so much more. The only con, I'm going to be honest, or the only negative drawback to a private room is it's going to be more expensive than staying in the main hostel. That's pretty much it. However, one, to some people, it's worth it. I'm not gonna lie, for me, I just stayed in a hostel in Hawaii and I had a private room, completely worth it. Second thing is it depends upon the hostel. But let's say you are traveling with another person, you might be able to split it. Do talk to the hostel. Some hostels have a strict rule saying, hey, if it's a private room, you cannot have multiple people staying in it. 1 per private room. Other hostels say, okay, if it's you and one other person, or max 2 people, that's okay. And if you think about it, if you're traveling with another person and you split it 50-50, it is probably going to be cheaper overall than say both of you staying in separate rooms in a room with tons of other people. Number 4, being social. Now, like I said, when it comes to hostels, the main 2 benefits I find for most people, there are some other ones, but the main 2 is it's cheaper and you get to be around a lot of people. There are a couple of things I do want to say though. 1, feel it out. Like anything in life, when it comes to human psychology, you can tell pretty quickly, does this person want to talk or not. Secondly, and this is a really good one, I noticed that when you're staying in hostels, there is a heightened sense, or I might even use the word expectation, to be more social. Like, let's say I'm out in public and I go up to someone and say, hey, where are you from? My name's Mark. They'd be like, it's kind of confusing. They're like, wait, what do you want? Is this a scam? Like, why are you trying to talk to me? At a hostel, that's almost expected. Like, the typical line I think most people use when meeting new people is saying, hey, I'm John, I'm Mark, I'm Amanda, nice to meet you. I'm from Boston, I'm from New York, I'm from Germany, I'm from wherever. So there is a very heightened expectation to be social. And I want to mention this because I can see a lot of people going to a hostel, especially for the first time. I can see it being a bit nerve-wracking if actually you've never stayed at a hostel, being like, okay, I'm a solo traveler, I'm going by myself, I'm about to be in a room with 15 other people. So it's 16 total, me plus 15. There's a reason why people staying at hostels stay at hostels. And a big reason why is being social. And I want to say that because although, yes, you do want to feel it out. Some people are just not in the mood for a conversation. Most people are. Most people, if anything, want to have a conversation and meet new people. Another thing on top of this, which is huge, is going out. Very commonly, like say it's a Friday night, usually the hostels say, hey, we're all meeting in the lobby at 8 p.m. We're going to this bar for drinks and trivia, or we're going to this one show. And what's kind of cool about this is you get there at 8 p.m. Like, so you don't know anybody. You're a solo traveler. There's maybe a group of 20 or 30 people. And what's awesome about this is even though, yeah, you are traveling alone, now you have a group of 20 or 30 people that at any point in time, you can walk up to and say, hey, I'm also staying at Joe Schmo Hostel. What's your name? I'm Mark, by the way. Number 5, food and groceries. This is an interesting one. I'm going to say that. So first off, typically at most hostels, it does depend. There's going to be a common fridge. And the way it typically works is you can go out, buy groceries, maybe buy drinks, whatever you buy. When you put it in the fridge, you would typically see a piece of tape somewhere. You put a piece of tape on your food, write your name, and then your expected leave date. Because they do clean out the fridge every so often and people do leave stuff in the fridge, that's typically the way it's done. You have a piece of tape on there with your name and your expected leave date. In addition, there's also typically a free section. Usually it's just one of the shelves that just says free. And what that means is if there's anything on that shelf, you can grab it and have it. And what's crazy is you never know what you're gonna see. I've seen beers, I've seen full on like chickens, salads, everything you can think of on the free shelf. And what's funny is sometimes people will see that on the free shelf and immediately claim it, right? I mean, it makes sense. There was one time I was staying at a hostel and I remember I had like a 4-pack of beers left and I was like, you know what, I'll put it on the free shelf. I left it on the free shelf. I went to start packing up. And when I came back like 5 minutes later to grab something from the fridge, someone already grabbed it, put their name on it, their expected leave date, and put it on a different shelf. So I will say the free shelf goes pretty quick. You're more than welcome to typically grab it right away and claim it. One other thing I want to talk about too is stealing. I think this might pop up, like say if you've never stayed at a hostel, it's like, oh, what if someone steals my food? Being honest, it very rarely happens. Not saying it can't, but theft in general, not just with food and groceries, and I'll talk about this a bit later in this video, but theft overall, I find is pretty uncommon in hostels. Granted, you want to be smart, you want to be safe. And I'll talk about these kind of safety pro tips a bit later, but talking about food right now, I find very rarely where people eat your food. It can happen. I'm not saying it can't, but let's say if you're buying a bunch of groceries and you're like, oh man, I'm putting my name on it, but is anyone going to steal my eggs or my milk? Typically, no. I'm going to be honest. It can happen, and I'm not saying it doesn't. At hostels, there is a certain level of respect that people have as like, hey, my food's in there too. I'm not going to touch yours. You're not going to touch mine. If anything, I think you're way more common to have your food being eaten in your office building when going to work than you are staying in a hostel. Lastly, one thing I want to mention is double check when it comes to the complimentary breakfast, lunch, dinner, basically anything along those lines. This is a good thing to know. There are some places that have full-on breakfast. Some to a hotel, it starts at 7 a.m., gets done at 9:30. Other ones say, hey, you know what? Every day we put out bagels around 1 or 2 p.m. as an afternoon snack in case you need a snack. This is something to look into because if you are traveling on a budget, this is a great way to save money. Number 6, being safe. So talking about things like theft and whatnot, let's go into the nitty-gritty. 1, I'm gonna be honest. Most hostels are typically pretty safe in terms of, like, say, your stuff. Like, start there. I've been to numerous hostels where people have left their passports out for an hour or two and gone and done something. I would never do that. I'm going to be honest. As much as I trust hostels, that to me is a bit ridiculous. But that kind of shows that in most hostels, like I said, there is a certain level of respect. So when it comes to things like theft, it is very uncommon. I've seen computers being left out, laptops, passports, legal documents, like things that I'm like, why would you ever just leave that out for hours on end? But that does kind of represent the kind of nature of a hostel. Again, though, I do have to stress, theft can happen. So this is why I always suggest bring like a lock with you. Make sure you lock your stuff up. I'd always much rather be safe than sorry. Yes, I feel like 99% of the time, if I leave something out, it's going to be okay. But why risk it? Second thing I will say, and this is something that can happen kind of without meaning to, is typically when you have your own bunk, you will sometimes, depends on the hostel, have your own private outlet. Sometimes you don't. Sometimes there are almost like common outlets with tons of power strips, and you just plug it in, let's say to charge your phone or your laptop or whatever. A huge pro tip I have is if you can go on Amazon and get these like super cheap, get a colored cord, or even buy a typical cord like the white iPhone cable and maybe color it with a permanent marker. Basically, try to set it apart. It is not super common, but it can happen. I've seen this happen where someone grabs what they think is their cord, but it's actually someone else's cord. And next thing someone knows is, maybe their passport didn't get stolen, but their iPhone charging cord did, just by accident. So make sure, like, if you have an item on you, like say it's a iPhone charging cord, a laptop charger, and it's the type of item that looks very similar to a lot of other people's items, try to make it customizable as much as possible. So someone will go there and say, oh wait, this is a red charger. That's definitely not mine. Now, when it comes to more safety measures, one thing I'm gonna say is definitely talk to the front desk in case anything happens. People who work at hostels have seen everything. There's a lot of good people who go to hostels, and I'd say 90%, maybe 95% of people are usually respectful. You really don't have to worry about them, but there are those 5 or 10%. Maybe they get too drunk and they get a little too aggressive, or someone gets too sexual and makes someone feel very uncomfortable, right? There's all these different situations that can potentially arise. This is why I also suggest doing research, because some hostels are 24/7 in terms of their staff. Similar to a hotel. If anything goes wrong, you go right to the front desk. Other ones, though, past 10 or 11 or 12, for like say an 8-hour gap, there's nobody working at the front desk. So let's say if you are worried about your safety, maybe find a hostel where, like, say there's people working there 24/7. When it comes to safety, though, I will say there's something about strength in numbers. Well, let's say if you are staying in a hostel and something's going wrong, or someone's, like, say, really being inappropriate towards you, or let's say someone is making you feel uncomfortable, there are other people there to kind of stick up for you. And this has happened. I've seen it where, there's like a weird situation and other people kind of step in immediately. Because like I said, most people staying in a hostel are very nice, very respectful. You really don't have to worry about. But of course, like anything in life, there are the bad apples. And so when it comes to your safety, I suggest maybe doing just like some research about the hostel. Another big thing is location. I will talk about location a bit later, because this doesn't really involve the hostel per se, more outside of it. But when it comes to that location, if like you want to be safe both inside and of course outside the hostel, location is also very important. I'll talk about that in a little bit. Overall though, and I have to be careful how I word this, I feel like when it comes to being safe, the first time I traveled and I was staying in hostels, especially like say if I was by myself, I was a bit worried, being, oh shoot, I'm by myself, there's tons of people here, you never know what could happen. I'd say most of the time, most hostels are pretty safe. Number 7, hygiene. Now this is one that I feel like might be pretty obvious to most people, and probably will be, but typically on a hostel, like I said, you have your own private bunk, your own private like bed, but besides that, they might provide towels, they might not. This is why I suggest do research. Some hostels do provide towels, some don't. In addition, it is one of those classic situations when it comes to hygiene and everything that you like say will leave the room with a towel, maybe like a mini bag with like say your toothbrush, toothpaste, that kind of stuff. Sometimes they have soap, sometimes they don't. You go, you use a shower, you brush your teeth, you use the bathroom, and you leave. And on that note, there is kind of an etiquette in the hostels. So let's say if it's 8 a.m. and you wake up and you want to take that morning shower, to be not super quick, it's not like you have to rush, but to be a bit cognizant, like, hey, there are other people waiting for these showers as well. So there is this kind of like unspoken rule in hostels that you do kind of want to be a bit quicker, because of course other people will need to shower as well or want to shower as well. When it comes to hygiene and cleanliness, I do have to say this, that most people are pretty clean, they smell good, that kind of stuff. But also, you never know. There are some people that I've seen that would take their socks off, walk around barefoot, and their feet smell super bad. There's some people that I'm like, okay, have they ever showered? Like, and I hate to say it, right? Like I said, at a hostel, you get all walks of life. But like I said numerous times throughout this video, self-awareness is important. So keep in mind, like if you do know that your feet smell, maybe try to put your shoes maybe outside the room. I know a lot of people who do that if their feet do smell. All these kind of things do kind of add up. And I will say, a lot of this is common knowledge. A lot of this I do feel like is being a person 101, but I do want to say this because, of course, you want to make sure you're having a good time at the hostel, but you also want to make sure everyone else is having a good time. Number 8, location. This is a big one because although it doesn't necessarily involve the hostel itself per se, it involves, like, say, your experience staying and, like, say, going out. One thing I'm going to say is, of course, make sure you're in a safe location. That's a huge one. Like I talked about earlier, safety is very important. I'd much rather spend a bit more money to be in a safer area in that neighborhood or in that city. Second thing is look into how close are you to the things you want to experience. This is another big one because, let's say I found a really cheap hostel in a good area, but I have to get 20-minute Ubers to and from, let's say, the center of town, or let's say it's incredibly far from the airport. That's a bit of a negative thing, right? However, if, let's say, I spend a little more money to be closer to, let's say, the center of town, I'd much rather do that because I'm actually going to save more money overall, not ordering Ubers and Lyfts. I might be able to walk to, let's say, where the action is, so to speak. And picking the right location for the hostel can just make your experience overall a lot better when it comes to just getting around and transportation in general. And one last thing I do want to say as just a huge pro tip, especially like say if you're staying in maybe not the best area, you're not sure. Typically, if you are staying in a questionable area, always Uber and Lyft, do not walk. Even if it's like say a 3-minute walk. Let's say you're like, okay, I can see the hostel from here, or I can see the bar from here that I want to go to, or the restaurant or whatever. If you're in a questionable area, get picked up right at your hostel, get dropped off right at that location, or vice versa. Never walk. Number 9, comfortable feel. I'm gonna go over this one pretty quick, but it is something I want to mention because it is one of those other things, like a lot of things on this list, that I kind of wish I knew before staying at hostels. And it kind of is similar to the social vibe, like I said earlier, but also a little bit different. And that is this. There is, I think, some kind of natural comfortable feel when staying at a hostel that things are very relaxed and easygoing. And I want to mention that because I feel like, you know, when it comes to the environment or the vibe or the energy of a hostel, it is something that it didn't throw me off guard in a negative way, but in a positive way. The first time I started staying at hostels. When I get to a hostel, everyone has kind of their bags laid out. Like I said, passports everywhere. People might be drinking. People might be just doing whatever. And there is this kind of like really nice, relaxed, easygoing feeling about hostels. And again, this is not necessarily a pro tip or like a technique I'm giving you compared to the other techniques on this video, but it is something I want to mention because I feel like anybody, the first time I ever stayed in a hostel was in Amsterdam, and I was like, okay, I don't know what to expect. Like, this is gonna be kind of interesting. Like, I've never been, and I was a bit nervous, of course, like trying anything new for the first time. And one big thing I really did not expect is just how easygoing everything is. And when it comes to staying in hostels, they're just a really awesome, relaxed, easygoing ambiance. Number 10, checking in. So let's say you've used all these pro tips I've given you and you're all set to go, and now you're checking into the hostel. This is important because it's typically not just like a typical hotel. One, the money situation. So there are some hostels that you can fully book on, like say Hostel World. That's kind of the staple when it comes to booking hostels online. Other ones you have to book maybe through their phone. But when it comes to money, some hostels you can easily have a credit card, some only accept cash. And this is something to be aware of, especially when it comes to traveling around the world, that like say you get to that hostel, you're expecting to pay with a credit card, and they're like, hey, sorry, cash only. We only accept cash. That can be an issue. So one, call in advance, do research, make sure your payment is figured out. That's gonna be a huge one. Secondly is the timing. So some hostels do have early check-in, some don't. This is kind of similar to a hotel, I will say that. But as you can imagine, with staying in a hostel and flights being all over the place and getting in, getting out, maybe call in advance and always double check if like so you can check in early, learn about like the check-in, but also check out rules, because some hostels are very different. It's not like a hotel where it's like, all right, check in at 3. It does depend upon the hostel that check-in can be a little bit different and kind of all over the place. Another thing when it comes to the timing of checking in is 24/7 or not. There are some hostels that say, hey, you can check in anytime you want, very similar to a hotel. There are other ones that say, hey, sorry, no checking in after 10. Other ones that even charge you, which is kind of annoying, a late check-in fee, where they say, hey, past 10 p.m. if you check in, it's an extra $25 or whatever. It is kind of annoying, I'm not gonna lie, but again, this is something to be aware of. That, like, say if the hostel only accepts cash, but you've already paid for it, you get there at 10:30 and they say, hey, sorry, you need to pay us $25 in cash, not on credit card. These are the kind of things you definitely want to be aware of when it comes to checking in, as every hostel does kind of have its own unique check-in process. Lastly, one interesting thing on this kind of checking in note is doing a day visit. There are some hostels that say, hey, you know what? Pay us $15 or $20 You're not going to be crashing here, but you're allowed to use our showers, our Wi-Fi, and we might include coffee, for example. So let's say you are traveling, let's say you're doing van life, for example, or you're doing a road trip, and you're like, okay, you know what? I kind of want to go somewhere. I'm crashing in my van, but I also want to visit this hostel just for a day. I kind of want to meet people. There are some hostels that allow you to pay just to be in that environment, to use the Wi-Fi, drink coffee, use your showers, etc., etc. And this is a great pro tip if you are traveling, but you have other means of where you're going to be staying. And now a bonus point, and that is American hostels. This is one I want to bring up because it's kind of weird that in my mind, I look at every other hostel in the entire world, being honest, hostels around the world, and then just American hostels. I find there is, and it's kind of weird, but I find there is a bit of a clear difference between American hostels versus like hostels pretty much anywhere else, whether it's in Europe or Asia or Africa or Australia, whatever. It's weird how American hostels are kind of its own thing. So there are a couple pro tips I will give, let's say, especially if you're watching this video not being from America. One, and I don't know why, American hostels are typically more expensive. I don't know why. There's been some American hostels I've stayed at for like $100, and I'm like, wait, for $100, I feel like I could get a motel or a hotel for that price. Granted, there are benefits to staying in hostels, like I said, but at $100 a night, that's kind of ridiculous. And I know there are some people that I've talked to, like say from Europe or other parts of the world, who have said, yeah, I'm used to staying at a hostel for 10 quid or 15 euro. And now here I am staying at a hostel in America for like 60 United States dollars. Like what is this? That is something to keep in mind. I don't know what it is, but something with American hostels, they're usually more pricey. I don't know why. Second thing is I find American hostels tend to be less social. I think in Europe and places in Asia and Australia, like, it is very common, I feel like, for most pretty much other countries in the world to travel to other countries. I will also say I think it's because, and this is my theory, in America, America's so big, and each state genuinely does feel like a different country. I've mentioned this before in other videos, that I've stayed in other places in America that felt like another country more than I've actually stayed in an actual other country. And so I think for a lot of Americans, they're not usually used to, like say, getting their passport and traveling to a different country because they're like, hey, why not just go to a different state? And so I think on that note, one thing I've noticed is American hostels, I think, tend to be a bit less social. I think, like I said, in Europe, for example, which is the perfect, I think, epitome of this, you can easily bounce to tons of different countries in the same day. It's very, very easy to do so. And so I think a lot of Europeans are used to interacting with other types of cultures, people. They're naturally, I don't say more social per se, but more just like open to meeting people. Americans are very nice and very outgoing, I will say that. But when it comes to the hostel vibe and environment, I do find American hostels tend to be a little bit less social. I find that a lot of people who, let's say, stay at hostels in Europe do so, of course, because of money, but also because they want to meet new people. I find for American hostels, a lot of the times it is kind of because it's cheaper, right? Although cheaper is a bit of a tricky term when you look at American hostels. So those are two things I do want to say. I find besides that, most American hostels, I will say as well, that I've noticed, do have a little bit more of an upscale setup compared to European hostels. Maybe this is why the American hostels are typically more expensive. And maybe this is because hostels in America are not as prevalent. So the ones that do exist are typically, more upscale or a bit more expensive. And that's the reason why, as opposed to in Europe, people have no problem spending 10 euro or 15 euro to stay at a hostel. And it's unbelievably bare bones. You just get the basics, beyond basics. All you get is like one shower, one bathroom, and that's it. But people are okay with that. In America, because people typically don't stay at hostels, maybe that's why. Again, it's just a theory. And last thing I want to say on that note is there are definitely way less hostels I find in America compared to Europe or other places. So when it comes to talking about the location, if like you are coming to America, be aware that like say you're like, wait, I'm used to there being 30 hostels in this one area. There's only 6. That is something you have to be aware of, that now like say you only have 6 options to pick from as opposed to a ton more.